We're catching up with Team 17 here at ID at Xbox during GDC in San Francisco. So, Kevin, what things are you showing off here with Worms WMD?
So with Worms WMD, it's the latest entry in the series. We're trying to make the best version of Worms that we've ever made before. This one goes back to its roots a little bit, so we've concentrated very much on making the best looking 2D version of Worms that we possibly could do. Its roots are in it being a 2D game. We're focusing on making the best looking 2D game we possibly can. It's all underpinned by a rock solid brand new engine, which really, in a really well way, recreates the physics and the feel of some of the classic entries in the series, with some really cool brand new features, new toys for the users to get to grips with and play with.
Yeah, it really is one of those franchises where people sort of, they have their own sort of favorite. They want it to feel and play like Worms 2 or whatever like that. How do you sort of go about trying to sort of make everyone happy in that sense when you're making a new 2D game?
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that. So there are fan favourites in the series. You know, most of the time if you ask people what their favourite memories of playing Worms are, they'll talk about games like Worms 2, Worms World Party, Worms Armageddon, and it's quite difficult to demonstrate exactly what it is about those games that makes them popular. It's a combination of things like the sense of weight that the worms have, the way that grenades and the physics, it all comes together to make a really satisfying play experience. And with this game, we kind of went back to those old games. I mean, not went back in like a casual way. We didn't just look at the old game and say, oh, what is it about it? We actually dug out the old code, and we had a programmer go through the old lines of code and see what it was that we could precisely recreate the essential feel of those old titles. And that's kind of like been the mantra. That's where we started with Worms WMD, that we wanted the core experience to be beautiful and solid and have that really nice feel to it that fans really appreciate with those old games. And that is kind of like that allied with the new features.
So I guess the physics engine is a lot more advanced than it was back in those days. So it's like the new physics engine is then sort of recreating those kind of physics that were in the old games.
Yeah, so in some of the more recent titles, we've had more realistic real-world physics, and that's meant that we haven't been able to do some things or recreate some things in a certain way. This is very much like it's harking back to the cartoon physics of the previous Worms games, and it's, like I say, it's something that's difficult to demonstrate, but it's something that's very important for hardcore fans of the series. For example, a good example is the ninja rope, the classic ninja rope. There's nothing like it on Earth. You know, it couldn't exist in the real world, but it's essential to a Worms multiplayer experience. And yeah, the classic ninja rope is a perfect example of something that we're bringing back to this game.
The art style is also very particular. You mentioned that you've sort of gone with a new sort of direction with it. Can you tell us a little about sort of that vision for the visuals and what went into it?
Sure. A bit of a two-pronged attack, really. So we have a brand new design for the worm. He looks unlike any previous worm before. He's, I would say, inspired by like modern kids' cartoons. He's quite angular. He looks a bit more maniacal than he has before. And then, as well as that, there are the new approach that we've taken to creating landscapes. When we first started developing this game, we had a fantastic concept artist, and he drew us this beautiful picture. It looked like kind of like bombed out like European streets. It looked like a little bit like a World War II kind of era. And Worms always looks at its best when an artist has free rein to sit down and digitally paint something, you know, paint whatever comes to mind. But important to the gameplay of Worms is the random landscape generation, and we realised that we needed a new approach to the random landscape generation, because otherwise, no matter how nice the artwork would look, the game would look similar to every previous Worms game that we've done before. So we've taken a new approach now. What we have now, we have a landscape generator that gives us something with all of the variety that is essential to making, you know, it's what keeps players coming back to Worms, the amount of variety in the kind of crazy shapes that the landscape generator can produce. But at the same time, what it creates is always aiming to look like an artist has sat down and drawn it by hand. So it's essentially lots of little individual assets, lots of individual hand-drawn assets that are pieced together. So it's almost like a scene generator. So the look of the game is hopefully it always looks like, the landscape always looks like you're playing on a digital painting, but it's actually composed randomly of different pieces and different elements.
One of the most difficult things to make something that is procedurally generated look like it's been handcrafted.
Absolutely. What's been great about working on this game is that we had quite a lengthy pre-production, so we got a lot of time to test ideas and prove ideas. So every feature that you see in the game started life as a small individual working prototype, and that's something that we got the luxury of doing with the random landscape generator. Before we committed to saying this is absolutely something that we can do, we were able to show that we could make it work. We could demonstrate internally to the rest of the team that we could make it work, and it's been incredibly successful. We've got something that offers easily as much as, if not more than, the variety that you saw with the old random landscape generators, but everything now always looks like a piece of artwork.
What approach are you taking to multiplayer? Are you mixing it up in any way, and what kind of tact are you taking with it?
So for launch, at the start, we're aiming to provide the most solid multiplayer experience that we possibly can do. I'm very happy to say that for this game, we have 6 players online. I mean, literally since the late 90s, the games have always been 4-player online. This is 6-player online. We're starting out with deathmatch modes, we have ranked modes, unranked modes, and the focus is very much on getting as solid an online multiplayer experience as possible. There are some rewards for online multiplayer, so for the ranked games, you can unlock new customization items, you can unlock new skins for weapons, things that really basically, if you play very well, you can kind of like show off in the game. Nothing that unbalances the game, nothing that will give you, say, a high ranked player won't do more damage than a low ranked player, but basically just things to customize and decorate and sort of like show your level of progress to the rest of the world.
What approach are you taking to the crazy weapons and worms? What kind of vision do you have for that?
So the approach is that it's a little bit of a mixture. So obviously you always need to start with the weapons that make the game tick, so the mainstays, the bread and butter of the game, the bazooka, the grenade, the shotgun, the blowtorch, so on and so forth. And then as well as that, the weapons that give the game its personality, so banana bombs, holy hand grenades, exploding sheep. And then we have a sprinkling of brand new weapon designs as well. We haven't announced the new weapon designs yet, so I can't really talk about them in too much detail, except to say that we've got a feature that we're not talking about yet, but we've got something very cool coming, something that puts a new twist on weapons and how you use weapons. But if you're a fan of the series, more than likely your favourites, your fan favourites are going to be catered for.
Would you say that the variation is greater than in previous games, or are you pulling it back in a little bit?
It's a little bit of a mix. So on the surface, we've pulled it back a little bit, but there are more weapons in this game, I think, than any other Worms game previously. So it's hard to describe, but we've covered quite a few bases with the weapon set, the weapon selection. But we've also worked very hard on trying to make this game as immediately accessible to new users as much as possible.
Could you tell us something about the buildings and vehicles that you're putting into the game?
Sure. So first of all, for this game, we wanted a very solid platform to work off. So like I've talked about, it's 60 frames a second game. It models the physics of the previous games. So we wanted that as like the base level to work with. We wanted, first of all, a great core experience, but then we wanted new features to make this game stand apart from any previous entry in the series. So the solution was essentially buildings, vehicles and mounted guns, and these features, we didn't want anything that would like raise the barrier of entry for new players. We didn't want anything that seemed to add any undue complexity to the game, so we treated all of the new additions as almost like extra toys within the sandbox world for people to play with. So each map now, when it's randomly generated, has a number of vehicles on it. In the demo today we're showing helicopters and tanks. We will be announcing more vehicles. They add a new layer of strategy because, well, in all sorts of different ways. When you're inside a vehicle, the vehicle acts a little bit like a protective shell for your worm, so you take less damage. Each vehicle allows you to get around the landscape a little bit more capably. Each vehicle has a weapon that does more damage than the ordinary weapons, but they're well balanced because vehicles like worms take damage. If you stay in a vehicle and it's taking damage, eventually it will explode. It'll go up with a really big bang, a bigger bang than any weapon can produce. So they're nicely balanced strategically, because there almost comes a tipping point where it doesn't make sense to hang around the vehicles. As soon as you see the tank or the helicopter smoking or sparking, it makes sense to get as far away from it as you possibly can. Buildings add a new strategic element to the game. They're great for multiplayer matches. Essentially, there are various numbers of buildings on the landscape. From the outside, say, it looks like a castle. When a worm goes inside a building, for the player that's inside the building, the front of the building fades down and reveals a cross-section of the building. If me and you are playing an online game together, all you see is my worm entering the building, and then he's hidden from sight, so he could be anywhere in the building. But there's all sorts of very satisfying things that just naturally come about through the gameplay. You know, very satisfying for you to rattle a grenade in through the open window of a building just to see it disappear from you, bounce around, and then blow a hole in the side of the building and see my worm get thrown out of it and thrown into the water. So, and then there's mounted guns as well. So on the landscape there are mounted flamethrowers, machine guns, sniper rifles, mortar launchers, and again they do a little bit more damage than your average weapon, but they're a little bit more circumstantial, because it's not like you can pick them up and take them with you. It has to be kind of like the right position. It has to make sense for that move, which kind of balances nicely with the strategy, because it means that all of these new features, it's not a foregone conclusion. It's not like this guy gets in the tank and therefore he wins. It takes a lot of skill to use the vehicles properly, and the right situation has to occur. So yeah, we spent an awful lot of time looking at that and thinking about the balancing and making sure that none of these new features would tip the balance in one player's favour.
I guess also in multiplayer it sort of balances out because you become the target then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. That's perfect. For example, when we first started playing with helicopters, the first few games we were looking at and we're saying, well, they're a little bit overpowered. Whoever has the helicopter seems to win. And then we played a little bit more. We did a little bit more balancing. And then it became like whoever got in the helicopter just painted a big target on themselves, and everybody would focus on trying to blow up the helicopter and making sure that that person didn't control the game.
Where are you at in development at the moment, and when can we see the game out?
So we don't have a final launch date yet. I would say we're coming towards the end of development. Now is very much about putting the finishing touches together, testing, balancing, coming towards the end of development, but we are launching in 2016. It's definitely coming out this year.
And the platforms, are they locked down?
Yeah, so it'll come into all home platforms, so PC, Xbox, PS4.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.